Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I go by Hiram or Bogwa. Hey guys, welcome back. So in this tutorial, I'll be covering arrays. So far, I've gone through variables and we've looked at primitive variables and also looked at wrapper variables. In addition to that, we've looked at the strings and understanding the difference between a string and a character. And like I was telling you before, a string is really just an array of characters. So today we'll be looking at arrays. So with that, let's get started. I'll go ahead and create the class. And then I'll go ahead and define the class. From there, I'll go ahead and create the main method. Now, as I had mentioned before, this argument that we use on the main method, it's really an array of strings. And this is just one way of how we can define that, or we can define it like this. What this is saying is it will take however many arguments that are passed to this method and put them in an array. It can be like this, so that also works the same. So one property that we have in an array is the length of the array, so how many elements are in that array. So I'll go ahead and print out how many arguments are passed. And I'll go ahead and compile it and run it. Now, one mistake that I have is the file that I've defined starts with a lowercase, and remember, it should start with a capital A. So there you go. Now I'll go ahead and compile it and run it. And there it is. Started with arrays of total with the one total. So the application started with one total argument. So let's see if we pass nothing. It has 0. So now we can pass multiple like this. 2, 3, and there it is. Picks them up. So I'll go ahead and I'll define an array of strings, and I'll initialize it, and I'll show you how to access the elements within the array. Now, one thing to note, for all elements in an array, they must be of the same type. So in this instance, I've defined that this array contains type string. So all the elements inside here must be of type string. And this is how you would define an array. And so this is how you define the array and initialize it at the same time. So it's string, and then I have the square brackets, right? So opening and closing. And then after that, I have the name of the variable, and then I initialize the variable. So to initialize that variable, you need an open and close curly brace, and then in between there, you can add the elements, which will be of the type that array is, and they will be comma delimited. Let's print out the length of the array, and then also let's see how we access those elements. Right, so now that will print out the total length of the elements in that list. Let's just compile that and see. Testers list has 3 total testers, and exactly as you can see, 1, 2, 3. So now it's like, how, if we wanted to print out the first element, how would we go about that? 0. So that would be how I access that testers list. Now, there's a video where I had mentioned that we start counting in programming, we start counting from 0. We don't really start from 1. So in this instance, it goes from 0 to 2. It has 3 elements. So when we're saying the length is 3. But whenever we need to access that element, we'll start from 0. So it'll be 0, 1, 2. And if you were to try and access 3, you would get an exception because 3 is not defined. So that would throw out an error. So let's just print them out, 1, 2, and 3. So let's run that. And something that I had covered in the strings video is you can add a new line and tab. So I'll just go ahead and add a new line with \n, and for each of these testers I'll give them a tab, so they'll be a little bit indented. And there it is. And as you can see, there's a new line here. I could have put one before. Let's put one before too. So I put 2. And that is, as you can see, there's breaks and tester 1, tester 1, tester 2, tester 3. So now let's try and print out the third array element. But note that there is no third. So this is actually trying to access the 4th element. So here we're accessing first, second, third, and now here's the 4th. And as you can see, we do not have a 4th element on here, so it will throw an exception. But let's just run it just to see. As you can see, whenever we're trying to access the 4th element, we got an array index out of bound. I think this is the first time that I'm showing this. To add comments to your code, you use /. So there's 2 / that allows you to write a comment. So that's not code that's going to execute. So there you can really type anything. There's also the long line comments, which are *, which use the asterisk. So that allows me to have a multi-line comment. And that's important to know. As a developer, you need to comment on your code, especially when you have like heavy logic, to kind of explain what's going on. Another thing that's important is your code should be self-descriptive, and I think I've mentioned this where I'm calling these variables testers list, so you can already guess it's a list of testers. So it's important how you name your variables. So now let's say we wanted to create an array, but we did not want to initialize the elements in it. We wanted to be able to add elements to it. So how would we define that array to begin with? So this time I'll do an array of integer. And in this instance, I'll define new integer. I'll give it a size 10. So that means I have allocated 10 spaces where I can store the integer number. So that means this numbers list will always have access to 10 spaces where it can store numbers. So in this instance, I can be like numbers 0 equals 1, numbers 3 equals 3, and I'll try and print that out. Now note, whenever I do number 3, I'm accessing the 4th element. So again, it's the index that I'm passing to this determines how many which element that I'm accessing. whenever I'm initializing to 10, so I've actually allocated 10 spaces. But in order to access like the 10th element, that would be numbers 9. So let me show you. So that would be like 9. Let's compile it and run it. There it is. You can see the numbers 1, 4, 10. Initially it took it as a \n. So what happens if we try to initialize with the 10th index? So if I was, instead of doing 9, if I was to try and initialize with 10, and I'll do 11th. We've initialized 10 spaces, and the way to access the 10th element is 9. But what happens whenever we try to set the value for the 11th space that we haven't defined in? Take a guess, and I'll compile and we can see. As you would have guessed, we'll get another array index out of bound exception. So the key thing to know is you access the values starting from 0. So if I define an array of 10 elements, to access the 10th element, that would be index 9. So the index starts from 0. It does not start from 1. So the way you always access the first element is you start from 0. So you have to like -1 of everything. Actually, let me show you another way to access that last element, which would be we can utilize the arrays properties themselves, where we can do numbers length -1, because we know the last element will be the total length of that array -1. So if it's 10, it's going to be 9. And we can do the same thing for the testers list, where we'll access this element by that length -1, and let's compile it and test that out. Let me comment out the exception. And as you can see, we're able to access that last element of the testers list and also for the numbers list. That's the basics of the array. I'll add a link in the description that talks a little bit more about the Java arrays, and I encourage you to read more into it and also play around with it. Thank you for watching my tutorials. Give it a thumbs up if you like it, and subscribe if you haven't, and also check me out on Instagram at coderush.io.